That day had been typical. She worked her full shift, picked up snacks from the grocery store, and headed home before dark, just as she always did. Nothing in her routine suggested danger. Her life was quiet and measured right up until the moment she walked into her apartment building with a stranger only seconds behind her. The man who followed her was Darius Wynn, 34, known to several apartment complexes around the west and south side of Charlotte. He had no stable address, moving between relatives' homes and small motels when he could afford them. He didn't hold a long-term job. Most of his days were spent wandering busy streets, convenience stores, and transit stops. Security guards and property managers across the area were familiar with him. They had documented multiple incidents of him hanging around secured buildings, watching residents, or attempting to enter behind someone. He wasn't violent in those prior encounters, but he made enough people uncomfortable that several properties filed trespass notices. On the day he encountered Maya, Darius had been seen near a gas station a few blocks from Magnolia Crest. A nearby store camera later showed him pacing along the sidewalk. Shortly before Maya arrived at the building, there was no evidence he knew her, no connection between them. He didn't appear to be waiting for anyone specific. But when Maya approached the entrance, he shifted directions and followed. Investigators later determined he had no legitimate reason to be inside Magnolia Crest. No one in the building recognized him, and no resident allowed him inside. Everything that happened afterward began with that moment at the front door, where he slipped in behind her. Earlier that afternoon, Maya had followed her usual routine. She finished her shift at 5:30, packed her work tote, and signed out with a quick nod to her supervisor. Nothing about her behavior seemed out of the ordinary. She walked to her car, a small gray sedan she kept spotless, and sat for a moment before pulling out of the lot. Traffic cameras showed her driving toward her neighborhood at a steady pace. She stopped at a local market, picked up a few groceries, fresh vegetables, a carton of eggs, and a frozen meal, and chatted briefly with the cashier who recognized her as a regular. She left the store around 6:15 and headed straight to Magnolia Crest. Her phone activity that hour showed a short voice note to her mother about weekend plans and a text to her cousin confirming lunch for Saturday. Nothing suggested she felt watched or followed. She didn't alter her route, circle any blocks, or pause before pulling into the complex. When she parked, she gathered her things before stepping out of the car, adjusting her tote on her shoulder. She walked toward the building at her usual relaxed pace. She did not look back once. Everything about her evening was ordinary. Everything about her movements suggested she felt safe as she approached her home. What she never saw was the man crossing the street behind her, narrowing the distance with each step. Inside the building, the lobby camera picked up the next phase of the approach. Maya stood in front of the elevator with her grocery bag resting against her hip. She scrolled her phone with her free hand. Seconds later, the man who had slipped in behind her entered the frame. He kept his head down, adjusting his jacket collar, pretending to focus on his phone. He didn't touch the screen, didn't type anything. Every few seconds, his eyes lifted, just enough to track her movements. Maya didn't turn around. She didn't seem to notice anyone behind her. Residents often passed through this lobby at all hours, and many people came and went without speaking. Nothing about his presence would have caught her attention. The elevator dinged. The doors opened slowly. Maya stepped inside first and moved to the front left corner where the control panel was. She pressed the button for the third floor. Behind her, the man stepped in just before the doors slid shut. He stayed near the back of the elevator, hands in his pockets, body still. He didn't press a button, a detail investigators later noted. Maya didn't look behind her to see whether he selected a floor. She assumed he lived somewhere in the building. The elevator began rising. The camera captured their reflections in the metal doors. Maya looking at her phone, unaware. The man watching her through the reflection, studying her posture and movements. Nothing was said, no gestures, no conversation, just the quiet, tense ride to the third floor. When the elevator doors opened, Maya stepped out and turned left toward her hallway. She carried her grocery bag and walked at a steady pace. The building's third-floor hallway camera captured her approaching her unit. She placed her bag on the floor while reaching for her keys. The man stepped off the elevator 3 seconds later. He turned left as well, maintaining enough distance to stay unnoticed, but close enough to reach her before the door closed. Maya unlocked her door, picked up her grocery bag, and pushed the door open with her shoulder. She began stepping inside, focused on turning on the light. The man closed the gap. He reached the doorway just as she crossed the threshold. He shoved the door open with his forearm and slipped inside behind her. Maya stumbled forward. The camera showed only the side of his jacket as he disappeared into the apartment. Then the door shut. The hallway remained still, a quiet residential corridor on an ordinary evening. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. No neighbors passed by. No one heard anything loud enough to draw attention. What happened inside the apartment wasn't visible to the cameras. But this moment, the forced entry, marked the beginning of everything that followed. For the next 3 days, that door never opened again. Once the apartment door closed, the cameras had no view of what occurred inside Maya's unit. But the scene investigators later uncovered allowed them to piece together the final minutes of her life. Maya likely realized immediately that someone had followed her inside. The grocery bag she carried was found overturned near the entryway, items scattered across the floor. Her phone was discovered beside the kitchen counter, screen cracked, suggesting it fell or was knocked from her hand during the struggle. The medical examiner later confirmed she fought hard. Bruising along her wrists and upper arms showed she tried to pull free. The items knocked over in the living room, an end table, a floor lamp, 2 cushions, suggest a fast, violent altercation that moved from the entryway toward the center of the apartment. She was attacked quickly, without time to scream for help. The layout of her unit meant no windows faced the hallway, and the walls were thick enough to dull noise. Neighbors later told detectives they heard nothing out of the ordinary that night. Evidence indicated that Darius assaulted her shortly after forcing his way in. The violence escalated, and during the confrontation, he strangled her. The medical examiner determined she died within minutes. There were no signs she ever regained consciousness. After the assault, the apartment fell completely silent. What happened next was even more unsettling. The man stayed inside the unit for almost 3 full days. Investigators found evidence that he moved through the apartment, used the bathroom, and entered her bedroom multiple times. He even opened her refrigerator. The air conditioning unit had been running the entire time, slowing decomposition. Nothing in the apartment was taken except for a few personal items he later packed into a duffel bag. When detectives reconstructed the timeline, they concluded that Maya died the same night she walked into the building. The cameras confirmed that no one else entered or exited her apartment until he finally stepped out. The hallway camera recorded nothing unusual that first night. Maya's door stayed shut. No movement came from her unit. The complex remained quiet, lit only by motion-activated lights. Inside, Darius stayed behind her locked door. Investigators later theorized he remained in the apartment because he feared running into residents or maintenance workers in the hallway. He waited for a moment when he felt safe enough to leave without being seen. Throughout the next 2 days, his movements were limited to inside the unit. Electricity usage data from the building showed small fluctuations, suggesting he may have turned lights on and off or opened the refrigerator. The blinds remained closed the entire time. Meanwhile, Maya's world outside the apartment didn't stop. Co-workers assumed she'd taken personal time. Her mother called once but did not worry enough to contact police immediately. Maya sometimes rested after long shifts. Her car, parked in the same spot, drew no attention. Many residents went days without driving. Inside her apartment, the man prepared to leave. Detectives later found several items missing: a wallet-sized card holder from her kitchen drawer, a scarf that had been on her couch, and an object tied to the assault. They were all later found inside a duffel bag recovered after his arrest. By the time he finally decided to exit the apartment, nearly 3 days had passed. There had been no signs of life from inside her unit, no phone activity, no movement, but no one knew yet that she was gone. On the 4th morning, concern finally reached the people closest to her. Maya's supervisor noticed she hadn't clocked in for her scheduled shift. It was unusual. Maya rarely missed a day of work. When she didn't respond to texts or calls, her supervisor attempted to reach her emergency contacts. Her mother tried calling again and again. No answer. She assumed Maya might be napping after working overtime, but by late afternoon, the unease became too strong to ignore. Her cousin drove by Magnolia Crest around 5 o'clock, hoping to check in. She noted that Maya's car was parked in the same space, untouched. When she rang the apartment buzzer repeatedly without any response, she called the leasing office to ask if someone could check. The leasing agent explained they couldn't enter without police. That prompted the cousin to call 911 and request a welfare check, telling the dispatcher that Maya had not responded to anyone for days. Two Charlotte Mecklenburg officers arrived shortly after. They spoke briefly with the leasing agent, who confirmed no packages had been picked up and no one had seen Maya leaving her unit recently. The officers went upstairs and knocked on her door repeatedly. No response. They checked the door, locked from the inside. They called her name several times. Nothing. The leasing agent retrieved the master key. When the officers entered the apartment, they immediately noted the disarray. The grocery bag overturned, items scattered, the lamp knocked over, and her phone cracked on the floor. It took less than a minute for them to find her in the bedroom. They backed out quickly and secured the apartment, calling for homicide detectives and forensic personnel. The officers stood silently in the hallway as the leasing agent covered her mouth, realizing the woman she passed in the lobby every week wasn't coming back. Detectives conducted a careful walkthrough of Maya's apartment, confirming signs of a struggle in the bedroom and that she had been dead for several days. There were no broken windows or damaged locks, only the hallway footage showing a man forcing his way in behind her. Security videos revealed the full sequence. Maya entered alone. The man followed her. They rode the elevator together. He pushed into her unit, and he didn't leave until 3 days later, carrying a duffel bag. The building was locked down while forensic teams collected fingerprints, swabbed for DNA, and documented every disturbance inside the apartment. Detectives analyzed the footage from multiple angles, studying the suspect's appearance and movements. With this evidence, they began building a detailed timeline to track and identify him. Detectives returned to the police station and began assembling all the footage from Magnolia Crest's camera system. There were 6 functional angles: the courtyard entrance, the lobby, the elevator, 2 hallway cameras, and the side parking lot. Each clip was reviewed, slowed down, and synchronized to create a continuous timeline of events from the moment Maya entered the building to the moment the suspect drove away. The courtyard camera captured Maya arriving and the man slipping in behind her. The lobby footage recorded the 2 standing near the elevator. The elevator camera showed the suspect watching her in the reflection of the door and never pressing a button. The hallway camera recorded the forced entry. The same hallway camera captured 3 silent days with no activity. Then on the 3rd morning, it recorded the man stepping out alone, locking the door behind him, and carrying a heavier duffel bag. The side parking lot camera caught him walking outside and approaching a charcoal Honda Accord. It captured him placing the bag in the back seat before getting into the driver's seat and pulling out of the lot. Together, the footage showed a complete, uninterrupted sequence of the suspect's movements. Detectives paused on the clearest images of his face in the lobby and hallway. They enhanced those frames, sharpening the lighting and adjusting the contrast to identify distinguishing features. A still from the parking lot showed the vehicle's color and partial license plate. The timeline was solid. The next step was identifying who the man was. With enhanced stills in hand, the detectives reached out to security firms and nearby apartment complexes. They emailed the images to multiple leasing offices and privately contracted security personnel. They also shared them across the regional law enforcement network, hoping someone recognized the man from previous incidents. It didn't take long. A building attendant from an apartment complex 3 miles away contacted detectives. She recognized the man immediately. She said his name was Darius Wynn, and months earlier, he had been trespassed from her building after attempting to follow a woman into a secured laundry room. The attendant had filed a report and provided the case number. Detectives ran his name through the system. His record showed prior arrests for trespassing, disorderly conduct, and a misdemeanor assault. There were also multiple complaints filed by women who reported being followed on foot, though none resulted in charges. His background fit the pattern investigators were seeing. A check of his DMV records confirmed he owned a dark charcoal Honda Accord, the same model and color caught on the side parking lot camera at Magnolia Crest. Detectives then pulled his utility history and address records. No single location appeared stable, but they identified a cousin on the east side of Charlotte where Darius frequently stayed. Patrol units began discreet surveillance of the property. A few hours later, they spotted the Honda Accord parked outside the home. The plates matched. The vehicle hadn't moved since early morning. They had found where he was. Before sunrise the next morning, detectives and uniformed officers gathered quietly near the cousin's home on the east side of Charlotte. They positioned patrol cars at opposite ends of the street to prevent escape and moved toward the house using the early morning shadows as cover. The goal was to take Darius into custody without alerting him or giving him the chance to flee. The cousin answered the door after a brief knock. He appeared confused but cooperative. When detectives asked whether Darius was inside, he sighed and pointed toward the back hallway. He said Darius had shown up unexpectedly and slept in the guest room. Detectives moved through the house calmly but deliberately. They found Darius sitting at the edge of the guest bed tying his shoes. He looked up at the officers but didn't run. When they told him he was under arrest for suspicion of homicide, he lowered his head and raised his hands. There was no fight, no negotiation. He seemed resigned to what was coming. Officers placed him in handcuffs and escorted him to a patrol vehicle. While he waited outside under supervision, detectives searched the guest room with the cousin's consent. They found the black jacket he wore the night of the crime folded under a pile of clothes. More importantly, they located the duffel bag captured in the hallway footage. Inside were several items taken from Maya's apartment, including a scarf from her couch, a card holder from her kitchen drawer, and an object tied to the assault. All of them were carefully photographed and collected as evidence. Detectives also requested a warrant to search his vehicle. Once granted, they searched the Honda Accord. They found fingerprints matching those lifted from inside Maya's apartment and traces of fabric consistent with items from her unit. These findings added another layer linking him to the scene. When officers finally drove away with him in custody, the neighborhood was still waking up. What began with a quiet walk behind a woman into an apartment building had now ended in a full-scale homicide arrest. Detectives processed Darius's arrest while forensic teams worked overnight on evidence from Maya's apartment. His fingerprints were found throughout her home, including the door he forced open. DNA from the assault kit and from under Maya's fingernails matched him completely, proving she tried to fight back. The autopsy showed she died from manual strangulation, with bruising consistent with being overpowered quickly. The injury timeline matched the footage, confirming she was killed the same night she entered her apartment. With fingerprints, DNA, video, and medical findings all pointing to the same person, investigators had absolute certainty that Darius was responsible for her death. With forensic evidence secured and the autopsy completed, detectives sat down with Darius in an interrogation room at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. The room was plain, white walls, a metal table, and a single camera mounted in the corner. Darius sat on one side, hands cuffed, shoulders slightly slouched. He avoided eye contact at first, staring instead at the tabletop. Detectives began with basic questions: his name, where he stayed the previous week, and whether he had been at Magnolia Crest Apartments. He answered quietly but without emotion. When they showed him the still images from the building's cameras, he stared at the pictures for several seconds. Then he nodded. He didn't deny being there. He didn't deny following Maya inside. The detectives walked him through the timeline, entering the courtyard, slipping through the front door, standing behind her in the lobby, riding up the elevator without pressing a floor, and forcing his way into her apartment. When they asked why he followed her, he said she looked alone and wasn't paying attention. He said he acted on impulse, that he saw an opportunity. He claimed he didn't intend to kill her, but admitted he attacked her when she resisted and tried to run. His tone stayed flat throughout the interrogation. He didn't apologize. He didn't express remorse. He described the attack as though recounting an event he had detached himself from emotionally. When detectives asked why he remained in her apartment for nearly 3 days, he said he didn't want to risk being seen leaving right away. He admitted taking items from her apartment to avoid leaving anything behind, though the forensic evidence showed he had touched multiple surfaces regardless. By the end of the interrogation, detectives had his complete account. His confession matched the footage, the forensic results, and the autopsy findings with disturbing accuracy. His words closed any remaining gaps in the timeline. Months later in court, Maya's case drew a full courtroom from day one. Prosecutors laid out the timeline using building footage, showing how Darius followed her, entered her apartment, and stayed for 3 days. Forensic experts presented the DNA, fingerprints, and autopsy evidence, confirming a violent struggle and his direct involvement. They also summarized his confession, which matched every part of the investigation. The defense didn't dispute the evidence, only arguing the attack wasn't premeditated, but the footage and timeline left no room for doubt. The jury deliberated briefly before finding him guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life without parole. Maya's family listened quietly as the verdict was read, absorbing the finality of knowing the man who followed her home would never go free. In the final moments of her walk home, Maya likely felt what most people feel at the end of an ordinary day. Tired, focused on her errands, and ready to step into the comfort of her own apartment, she had no reason to sense danger behind her and no hint that someone was watching her movements so closely. Her story shows how quickly a normal routine can be interrupted by someone with harmful intentions, and how people who move through life quietly, trusting their surroundings, minding their business, and simply trying to get home, can be blindsided by someone waiting for an opportunity. It is a reminder of how vulnerable a person can be when they believe they are finally safe, and how a single moment of unseen danger can change everything. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, like, and share, and stay tuned for more stories.